Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 284. Greta, how
Hey,
go with things?
I'll go with things. Things go with well.
Good.
Yes. How about yourself?
Going well.
Going well.
Going well.
Good.
Just as well as can be. Um that sounded sarcastic, but it wasn't sarcastic. Everybody compliment Greta on her newly bespectacled self. I told her now that she's wearing glasses, she has to be the knowledgeable and smart one on the podcast. Now, not to say that she's dumb or like has been dumb. I realize that's kind of how that comes off.
Yep.
And but now she looks like, the nerd, even though have been the nerd like on the podcast for a long time.
You may have just insulted all of our listeners that wear glasses.
Well,
because
glasses mean you're a nerd. Like that's how it is, right? That's the universal symbol.
Has nothing to do with the fact
nerd
that your eyes don't work right. Okay, whatever.
Oh man.
Well,
yeah.
I'm
gonna get so many like 1-star reviews over that.
Yeah, you probably will, but it helps me see better.
No, it's
when
awesome.
I wear them.
I think they look great. Honestly, I really like them.
Oh, so. Thank you. Amazon for the win.
I'm not sure you want to say that on the Tolkien podcast these days.
Oh crap! You're absolutely correct. Well, when it comes to glasses, when it comes to cheap readers, let me clarify.
I just a little aside. I've been, on that note of Amazon, I've been posting a lot of videos, various little short thought pieces on Amazon Rings of Power, Latron Prime related things over the last few weeks. And man, people are really, there's a lot of folks that are really like just up in arms about this thing. And
I didn't know.
I mean, I get it. Like I get why people are feeling, I really am trying hard to reserve judgment and to be like as fair as I can. But I totally get where people are coming from too. And I do have a bad feeling about things. So anyway, that's my point in saying
that makes sense. Thing. I hadn't even linked. I was completely thinking about cheap readers, not about, the show. But regardless,
yes,
we're gonna have lots to discuss whenever it does come out, and regardless of what's involved, we'll have lots to discuss.
Greta's also drinking a sparkly water right now, so I just want to preface that just in case she has to burp on.
Jeez, because you never do that.
It happens from time to time. I'm just saying you're drinking straight bubbly, right? So it's
my favorite flavor.
Bubbly. You're drinking straight bubbly. So
I am drinking.
I dilute mine so that I have less issue with that, but it does, when you drink it straight, it can be a little more challenging in that regard. So
I do like my bubbly straight. So sue me.
Yeah.
Well, now everybody is forewarned and they've been caught up on
that's like 3 strikes already. You got glasses, you got the nerd alert, you got the thanks be to Amazon, and then you have bubbly. So anyway, this episode's starting off great.
Well, I guess there's only room to improve from here. Maybe.
Oh man.
Now that we've caught everybody up on my optical function and my GI function, I think we can proceed as planned.
This has been an epic beginning. So
I guess we were due, because we've been very we've
been very efficient as of late.
Super efficient.
In 2022, it was kind of so we were due for like a more rambling, intro, I guess. So hopefully you're still listening at this point.
Some more foot in mouth type scenarios as well. So I think we've checked both those boxes.
Yeah.
But this is a really great chapter.
By this point, like, I'm surprised if anybody's even still listening. So if you are still listening at moment 520, you need, actually it might be a little earlier than that. But anyway, if you're still listening at this point, I need to hear from you in the comments below, right? Like, still here. Okay. Just say still here. That's all I need from you. Because we want to know that you're a true fan, you're a true fan of the Tolkien Road.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Now let's talk about the chapter.
Let's do it.
Because it's really good.
In this episode, we will be discussing Chapter 6 of the Silmarillion, of Fëanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. Before we get started, we'd like to give a double up air five to our remaining patrons, if they're still around.
Jeez. I'm sure they are. I have faith.
I know they are. They're awesome. 3, 2, 1. Whoosh, boom. All right.
Nailed it.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, and Jacob Lockham. And a shout out to our newest patron. Actually, this is a welcome back to our newest returning patron, Heathen Rohirrim. So welcome back, Heathen Rohirrim.
Yes, welcome.
Glad to have you back.
Indeed.
All right. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad, and becoming a patron is easy and lands you a bunch of cool perks like episodes early and ad-free. The more you pledge, the more you get. So learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Cool.
All right. So on YouTube, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. What were you going to say?
I was just going to remind everybody about our live stream.
Well, yeah, live stream. Tell them what it is.
It's next week, guys. Wednesday, March 23rd at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. Central.
8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. That's right.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Which, yes. I think that's an important clarification. Did you know that I never...
Well, I just want to make sure you didn't mean like Greenwich Mean Time or something like that.
Oh, no, you're right. You're right. But when I grew up in Maryland, which is in the Eastern time zone, and whenever I was watching commercials, they would say 8, 7 Central. And I was like, what does that even mean? And then even after we moved to Tennessee, it took me like a good year or two to be like, yeah, Central time is a little weird. I think it's the weirdest of all the time zones.
Yeah, I grew up Eastern time too.
Yeah, sure you did.
So it was always 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, and you're like, look, those Central time losers. Look at them.
I know. It always
Who even lives in Central time.
It was just a little like mind blowing to me that like I could be watching something at 8, but then there was like other people that were watching the same thing, but at 7. Like it was very odd to me. So yes, I'm glad you clarified.
Now we're Central time people, and we have been for a long time. So we're always having to like deal with all these Eastern time snobs, being like, we're gonna do it at 8, and you're like, is that Eastern time, Central time, Mountain time, Pacific time? Which time is that? What are we talking about here? And they're like, what other time is there? It's like,
all of our family lives in Eastern time, so we're allowed to rag on it.
So whenever we're supposed to be somewhere, it's like,
we always have to say your time or our time, or
well, and also we lose an hour going somewhere, right? Because you cross from Central to Eastern time, and that happens. Anyway, this has just been one huge long digression of an intro. Let's do this.
Let's do it.
Let's do this thing.
Let's do some unchaining.
Let's unchain this episode from our mundane little everyday ways and talk about the amazing things of the Valinorian years, the Noontide of Valinor. All right, so the quote of the week comes from the Silmarillion chapter 6. Greta, you want to read this?
Sure. But they obeyed the judgment of Manwë. For those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel.
Wow, that's a good one. Kind of a proverb there,
It does sound like it, yeah.
Those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel. So,
even if you want to.
Yeah, well, and I think, there's a couple of characters in this chapter that definitely want to rebel, but it also sets the stage, I think, for what's going to happen in chapter 7 through 9, right? The big controversy and ugliness that really is going to arise in chapter 7 through 9. So, it's a way of adding a little foreshadowing juxtaposition to the mix. So.
Yes. I actually read that when I was reading the chapter. I read that quote twice, and I kind of had to think about it for a minute, figure out what it was saying. And then I was like, it's almost kind of like a practice what you preach, right? Like if you're going to be defending against rebellion, you yourself cannot be a rebel.
Well, and I think for us, for you and I, as Catholics, like this was something that, I think we kind of had to learn a little bit becoming Catholic, because, you when you become Catholic, especially if you're becoming Catholic from another, like a non-Catholic Christian tradition, there's a lot that you all of a sudden adopt or are told you need to adopt when you're traditionally you have not adopted that, right? Like in the past, you've almost been taught like that's wrong, right?
No, that's true.
And so you have to kind of that's kind of, it's a very, I will say, Tolkien being a Catholic, I don't have a problem bringing this up kind of on this sidebar. It's a very Catholic principle, right? Like that this idea of like that you don't treat your judgment or your inclination on certain things as being the final word, right? That you do have an ultimate respect for an authority that's outside of yourself, right? And that you are willing to like submit yourself and your intellect and your mind to those things, right? To that specific authority, right?
There's a tremendous amount of freedom in that too.
Well, there is. I don't want to like
no
go on a huge rabbit trail because this is not a podcast about Catholicism, but it is something that when I read that as a fellow Catholic of Tolkien's, that's what I think of, right? That's immediately where my mind goes.
It's a sign of respect too to that authority. Yeah.
All right. So, well, I think we already acknowledged that you are ready to unchain chapter 6, Greta.
Yeah.
All right. So a little synopsis here. Having learned how the Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri came to Middle Earth. Well, I didn't finish writing that synopsis. All right. In chapter 6, we'll learn of the birth of Fëanor, the creator of the soul. That was just
I feel like it.
It actually works.
It works.
I like to have a little paragraph synopsis and then do like a basic outline of the chapter. But apparently my mind trailed off and I didn't continue writing.
Which in and of itself is very Tolkienian of you.
I'm just gonna try that again. Having learned how the Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri came to Middle Earth.
Is that what we would call a dangling participle?
That's something. It's something that just let that land for a minute and be like, okay. All right. In chapter 6, we will learn of the birth of Fëanor, the creator of the Silmarils, of the death of his mother Miriel and their consequences thereof, of Finwë's remarriage and the birth of Fëanor's half brothers, and of Melkor's release from captivity after 3 long ages.
Lots of good stuff.
As with each episode, we won't be covering every detail of this chapter, but instead doing our best to hit the high points and unpack interesting and important details. If we missed something you guys want to discuss more, let us know. All right. So this is called the Noontide of the Blessed Realm. All right.
This time of when this story is taking place.
That's right.
Or this part of the chapter. It's part of the Silmaril. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Noontide of the Blessed Realm, a long and happy period. So one thing we haven't talked a lot about in this series so far is excuse me, we haven't spoken a lot about the timeline and how we reckon like how long certain periods of time are, right? And I've actually mentioned this idea before, that I think this is actually a problem of the Silmarillion, that it's like, I think it would be much more approachable for most readers if there was actually like a chronology that you could reference, right? And like amongst the appendices, right there within it. Interestingly, Tolkien did create chronologies essentially for the Silmarillion, right? And he dealt with issues of like how long periods of time are that elapse in different eras. And so I wanted to mention that briefly. My reference for this is this right here, Morgoth's Ring, which is volume 10 of the History of Middle Earth. There's a lot of fascinating stuff in the history of Middle Earth. If you don't own any copies, it's worth picking up. These are worth picking up as references. We did a whole series on it last year, where we just went through each volume and kind of picked out the highlights and talked about what was in them. I highly recommend going back and listening, to those as an introduction. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in these. They're very challenging works, but there's a lot of interesting things in here. And in particular, Tolkien, this has sections that deal with questions of like, how long was a year in Valinor? Like, so how did they reckon time in Valinor, right? And it all, once the 2 trees are created, it actually has to do with the 2 trees, right? With like they reckon time according to the 2 trees. so it actually gives a specific timeline within this book right here. Now, was this the final one? That's a more in-depth question. I'm not prepared to answer that, but just to give you some perspective on at least where Tolkien's mind was on this question at one point, according to the timetable in here, Melkor was imprisoned in 1100. According to the Valian year reckoning, right? The Valian year reckoning, VY. So 1100 VY. And then he was unchained in 1400 VY. So it says later in this chapter that he was chained for 3 ages, right? So 3 long ages. So according to that, a long age would be 100 years, 100 Valian years, right? 100 years of Valinor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So 300 years of Valinor was the total period of time he was chained. That was the noontide of Valinor. So this in 300 Valian years. Now, how long is a Valian year according to our own sun year? And so Tolkien also mentions that. And there's again, this is a question that there was some variance on in his thought over time, but I'm going to go with what's here in the History of Middle-earth, Volume 10. He says there that essentially 1 Valian year is equal to 10 sun years, right? So 10 of what we think of as a year. And so how long a period of time would the noontide of Valinor be? It would be basically 3,000 years, right? 3,000 years as we think of years.
300 times 10.
Right, okay. 300 times 10.
Yep.
So anyway, just to give you some perspective on how long a period of time actually elapses between when Melkor is chained and when he is released. It's also noted in there that Fëanor is born in the year 1179 in Valinor, right? So he's basically 2,210 sun years old when Melkor is released, okay, in the year 1400 VY. So that gives you just some perspective on the sorts of time frames we're dealing with here. It can all seem like it happens very quickly in the book because these are somewhat short chapters, but really, like, this is just it's kind of like, you don't really get many stories told about the dysfunctional or the functional time periods because everybody wants to know about the dysfunctional. Right? We were talking about that with why are there so many stories about dysfunctional families? And it's like, because no one wants to read a story about a functional family.
Because it's
right?
boring.
Right. It's boring. You want to read about the dysfunctional family. You want to read about the dysfunctional periods of time. Right. Like you want to read about, I love reading about World War II. Why? Because it's like, just there's so much craziness happening right at all times, and the stories are all dramatic. Everybody's life was dramatic during World War II, right?
Yeah.
In some way or another. So there's a long period of just this like time of blissful existence in Valinor that apparently happens that we don't know a lot about. Now that doesn't mean certain bad things don't happen. We're going to find out about some of those, but they aren't on the same level as what happens after Melkor is released.
Okay.
So quick note, Rumil of Tirion, he created the first signs for the recording of speech and song. Of course, that's important because we're talking about like the characters, right, in which the languages are written down. And as we all know, language is a very important thing for Tolkien and the creation of these stories and his whole life. All right, so let's read about the birth of Fëanor. Greta, do you want to read this section right here?
Yeah, sure. Yes. In that time was born in Eldamar in the house of the king in Tirion upon the crown of Tuna, the eldest of the sons of Finwë and the most beloved. Curu Finwë was his name, but by his mother he was called Fëanor, spirit of fire, and thus he is remembered in all the tales of the Noldor. Miriel was the name of his mother, who is called Serinde because of her surpassing skill in weaving and needlework. For her hands were more skilled to fineness than any hands, even among the Noldor. The love of Finwë and Miriel was great and glad, for it began in the blessed realm in the days of bliss. But in the bearing of her son, Miriel was consumed in spirit and body, and after his birth she yearned for release from the labor of living. And when she had named him, she said to Finwë, "Never again shall I bear a child, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Fëanor."
So Fëanor is the first child of Finwë and Miriel, and and as it says there, just bringing forth Fëanor into the world was, I mean, it essentially just took everything Miriel had, to make that happen. And
I think most mothers feel that way after every birth.
After every birth. Well, and as we can see, but apparently this one was one from which she didn't recover, right?
Yeah, it's very sad.
And so Fëanor is brought into the world in sort of these circumstances, and
it gives us a little bit of an insight into his character as well.
Well, and just this sort of that he is this that he's really gonna he's like this force of nature in some way, right?
Yeah, he's almost like supernatural in a way.
Yeah. That he and really with this, with so much of what we have here, but I think particularly in this, there's this ancient way of thinking that we don't really think of in terms anymore. It's just like, well, you have a baby, it's this biological thing and it just happens. But like, in the ancient world, I think there was more of this propensity to think in terms of like, well, the like kind of connect the temperament of a specific person to, maybe like how like what they did to their, what it did to their mother to bring them into the world, like kind of, that there might be a connection between these two things. So, but anyway, Miriel, she is just, it takes everything she has to bring Fëanor into the world, and she tries to get healed, but it's really not to be. So we read about the passing of Miriel. She went then to the gardens of Lorien and lay down to sleep. But though she seemed to sleep, her spirit indeed departed from her body and passed in silence to the halls of Mandos. The maidens of Este tended the body of Miriel, and it remained unwithered, but she did not return. Then Finwë lived in sorrow, and he went often to the gardens of Lorien, and sitting beneath the silver willows beside the body of his wife, he called her by her names. But it was unavailing, and alone in all the blessed realm, he was deprived of joy. After a while, he went to Lorien no more. And we, one quick thought on what I was saying before too. I think there was also a greater propensity to really strive to name someone for like in a way that really reflected who they were, right? To like actually give you insight into who they were, right? And of course we see this with Fëanor, right? He's called by his mother Spirit of Fire, and it's important. Like I think Kuru Finwë, I'm just going to guess means son of Finwë, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he's called Fëanor by his mother, right? And so that reflects like it basically like just did take all of the fire out of her, right? To to bring him into the world.
Yeah.
Did he require so much of his own fire that it kind of took him, that it took all the fire she had out of her, right? So Finwë is, and again we have to ask the question, like why is Miriel, like why would she die, right? Like she wasn't, so she's an elf, she's immortal,
right. Yeah.
Why would she just like pass on like this? And I think I think the analogy can be, I think it's true that if like you dropped an elf out of an airplane, of course you can't do that, but you dropped an elf out of an airplane from 10,000 feet, right, and they just like hit the ground, like they'd probably die, right? Like you do something that puts them through a traumatic experience, and we know that elves die in battle, right? You put them through any kind of traumatic experience, and it can kill them, right? Now they don't naturally die, they won't die of old age like human beings will, but they can die from various the consequences of various things, right? Various traumatic
experiences. Yeah, because I was wondering the same thing. So I was like, I thought elves only died if they were actually killed, like in battle. But if you extend that to a broader description of just trauma in general, then this seems to make more sense. The Fëanor's birth was a traumatic event. It was almost like a battle. for Miriel.
Good point. I like the way you put that, right? That it was a battle for her. And like it also just tells us something, because we don't have, I think this is the only example I can think of where an elvish woman dies, because of giving birth, right? I can't think of any other. There might be another instance, but that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. So, this tells us like so much of what we need to know about Fëanor, right? But we also need to like understand that like this can tell us something about Fëanor from the perspective of like growing up knowing that it was so difficult, your birth was so difficult on your mother that she ended up dying, right? Like I feel like psychologically that would be kind of a tough burden to carry.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
And it perhaps it reflects a certain sacrifice, but I think growing up with that knowledge, it would be a very difficult thing. I mean, you hear stories from time to time of women who will give birth, will become pregnant, find out they have like some kind of cancer, and and they're given the choice, like you can either abort this pregnancy, or you can carry it to term, but then we're not, your chances of surviving are much less likely. It's always amazing to hear the stories of the women who choose, to give birth, and then just, I'm sure it has to be a difficult thing. Not that like there's any blame to be assigned or anything like that, but it's like, but it has to be a difficult thing to know that like my mother gave me, like I'm alive today because my mother gave herself to me this way.
Yeah.
I think honestly that just part of that's true of all mothers, like regardless of whether you give your life fully or not, right? Like the act of bringing forth a child, through your body is like you said earlier, Greta, you would know, it's a traumatic experience, right? It really is.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of good ways too. But your body is not your own when you're, when you're pregnant, and then when you're, even the process of giving birth, like it's just everything you do, like your whole body is just like the baby is the focus. Like, I think my mom told me there's like this old wives' tale that like you lose a tooth for every kid you have, because when you're pregnant, like all of the stuff that would typically keep you healthy is kind of, is given to the baby. I mean, not all of it, but like your own health in a way is compromised.
Yeah.
So, because you're supporting another living being, which is an amazing thing in and of itself. But yeah, I agree. I think I'm sure Fëanor lived with a tremendous burden. And I feel like that living with that kind of knowledge could be used for good, or it could be used for evil, right? Like it could be something that you just, you let yourself despair and say, this sucks and whatever. Or you could almost like live your life as a tribute to the person that lost theirs for you.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, right? Because maybe there's this question of maybe he was striving to do that, right? Like maybe he wanted to do that. And so, there's a little bit of a discussion here about Finwë really putting a lot of focus. He just like put, like once Miriel was gone, he mourned for a time, and then he kind of puts his focus on Fëanor and like bringing him up. And remember, Finwë's the high king of the Noldor, right? So it's not just that like this is another family. It's like she was the queen, right? She was the queen of the Noldor, and so this is like on display, for everybody. And furthermore, like I said, there's no other examples I can think of where this happens, right? Where an elvish child takes essentially in birth, his birth results in the death of his mother, right? Of his elvish mother, right? So it's even more like a spotlight on it. Like, you can just imagine the elves weren't above this, right? You can imagine the people being like, what was wrong with this guy? Like, oh, there goes Fëanor, right? They certainly weren't above those things. And, especially once Melkor comes back into the picture. But, anyway, like there's a lot, I think there's a lot here. I had another thought, and unfortunately I think I lost it, but, Oh, well, just on the note of Fëanor being, Finwë wanting to put all of his time and energy into Fëanor, right, and maybe form him to think of his life as a tribute, right? Well, then Finwë decides he wants to remarry, right?
Mhm.
And so for Fëanor, would that have been like, wait a minute, like, why are you doing this? Why are you insulting my mother who gave her life for me, right? By remarrying, right? It doesn't say that explicitly in the text, but you could see how maybe that works on a psychological level, right?
Yeah. No, I completely, yeah, no, I hear that, but I also say I think that's a very selfish perspective.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the right perspective. I'm saying I could see Fëanor having that perspective, right?
Yeah.
If you were the one and you're like, this is the person who gave their life for my sake, and you're going to go and tarnish her legacy, like you could see somebody thinking in these terms, right? That person thinking in those terms.
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's move on. And good note here, all his love he gave thereafter to his son, meaning Finwë, gave his love to Fëanor, and Fëanor grew swiftly as if a secret fire were kindled within him. Remember the secret fire, right? Anytime you see that term, and it's lowercase here, but anytime you hear that term, secret fire, you have to think like of the fire that this flame imperishable, right? The thing that that just seems to be at the root of everything, already, like the Holy Spirit almost, right? It's like at the root that animates all things, right?
And again, that can be used for good or evil,
right?
All
right, so moving on, let's read about Fëanor's wedding and his and then the birth of his children. Go ahead.
While still in his early youth, he wedded Nerdanel. Did I say that right?
I think it's Nerdanel.
Nerdanel.
Correct us if we're wrong.
Yeah. The daughter of a great smith named Matan. Among those of the Noldor most dear to Aule, and of Matan he learned much of the making of things in metal and in stone. Nerdanel was firm of will, but more patient than Fëanor, desiring to understand minds rather than to master them. And at first she restrained him when the fire of his heart grew too hot. But his later deeds grieved her, and they became estranged. 7 sons she bore to Fëanor. Her mood she bequeathed in part to some of them, but not to all.
Okay. So Fëanor has 7 sons. We don't hear a whole lot about Nerdanel for the rest of the, in the rest of the tale. I wouldn't call her a major figure, but it is interesting to note that she was also firm of will, but a little bit more patient, and that there is some of her in Fëanor's sons, right? So they aren't necessarily, some of them are pretty strong, like strong-willed. Some of them are a little bit more patient, but there are 7 of them, so they're going to be an interesting mix, right? All right. And then Finwë, after this marriage, it's when Finwë remarries. Got a little something in my throat. I'm trying to clear it, but so you're probably going to hear me keep on clearing my throat for a little bit. All right. Now it came to pass that Finwë took as his second wife Indis the Fair. She was Avanya, close kin of Ingwe, the High King, golden-haired and tall, and in all ways unlike Miriel. Finwë loved her greatly and was glad again. But the shadow of Miriel did not depart from the house of Finwë, nor from his heart. And of all whom he loved, Fëanor had ever the chief share of his thought. So, the shadow of Miriel did not depart from the house of Finwë, nor from his heart. And of all whom he loved, Fëanor had ever the chief share of his thought. So it's not this thing where it's like Finwë's like, well, now that you're grown up, I just don't even care about you. Like, he still very much gives his thought to Fëanor, and the shadow of Miriel is still there, right? So the shadow, right? Not the memory, the shadow of Miriel, right? It's the, like, the memory of her haunts their home, right? Haunts the family. So
yeah, that's an interesting choice of words, because it clearly has more of a negative connotation than, because at first I was like, oh, maybe they mean like her spirit, right? Or like you said, her memory. But the shadow is very different.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's a shadow is cast when there's a lack of light.
Yeah. It brings darkness into the equation. Right.
Right. Yeah. So that's really interesting that's the word that Tolkien chose to use here. And it makes me sad because that's, that's not how Miriel would want to be remembered. And that's not what, that's not what that's clearly this shadow is going to cause trouble.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be a source of light or encouragement.
Whenever any kind of shadow enters into Middle Earth, it's usually a bad thing.
Usually a bad thing.
It's usually a bad sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So from the marriage of Ingwe and from the marriage of Finwë and Indis, come Fingolfin and Finarfin, right?
Right. Those are 2 of the 7.
So they are part Noldor, part Vanyar, right? And
I'm sorry, did we cover, was Miriel a Noldor?
I believe that Miriel was part Noldor and part Teleri. I need to double check that though.
I was just curious.
Yeah. But yeah, Fëanor is not pleased by this. And one of the things it does is it, before it sounds like Finwë and Fëanor had lived pretty close, and now they just, Fëanor kind of goes off on his own and does his own thing. So there's a separation, there's a literal distance that grows between them at this point. And one would presume the rest of the Noldor, right? With Fëanor and the rest of the Noldor. Yeah. Let's see here.
Looks like maybe she was Noldor.
First wife, Miriel's hair was being an unusual color for one of the Noldor. She was highly skilled in the art. I thought I'd read somewhere that she was part Teleri, but I may be confusing her with somebody else. Anyway, but Indis is definitely part. She is Vanyar. So
right.
This children from their marriage, Fingolfin and Finarfin, are part Noldor, part
Vanyar.
Vanyar as
well. Yeah.
So I do think it's important that we deal with this note about what people thought, right? Because this gets much to my point. Like the Noldor, the elves weren't above sort of the gossipy sort of speculation that we all do as men, right? As human beings. So, let's deal with this. Many saw the effect of this breach within the house of Finwë, judging that if Finwë had endured his loss and been content with the fathering of his mighty son, the courses of Fëanor would have been otherwise, and great evil might have been prevented. For the sorrow and the strife in the house of Finwë is graven in the memory of the Noldoran elves. But the children of Indis were great and glorious, and their children also. And if they had not lived, the history of the Eldar would have been diminished. So, I think, when Tolkien, there's a couple of instances where Tolkien will speak in a way like this. And I think where he's kind of looking back on the things that will come, right? And sort of giving a more Iluvatarian perspective. I think Tolkien is trying to speak to this idea that what we might intend for evil, good can come out of, right? That greater good sometimes comes out of, right? And that's not to say the ends justify the means. Of course, it's not to say that Finwë remarrying was actually evil, but that, that's this rebuttal that, well, was it really worth it for Finwë to remarry and have these children? Was that actually a good thing? And the answer, from Tolkien seems to be yes, right? That Fëanor is responsible for the things that he eventually does, right? It's Fëanor that's responsible for the things that he eventually does. And that does not, the fact that he goes on to do these things because maybe there's a breach that forms between him and his father over this marriage does not cast blame upon his father, right? It casts it really is Fëanor's blame, right, to take upon himself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we have a very cursory overview of the whole story. So is it possible that, there were heated words exchanged at some point between Fëanor and his father, and that his father said, some ugly things to him, and that contributed to it? Yes. But in the simple act of just like, was it really a good thing for Finwë to remarry? It seems like in this case, it's like, yeah, if he wanted to, then yes. Right. That was a good thing.
Yeah.
So
and you can't blame, you cannot blame Finwë's decision to remarry on Fëanor's actions. Like you can't, there's really, because it's very easy to make the opposite argument. Let's say if Finwë hadn't remarried and just gave everything he had to his son, the result could have very well been the same.
That's true.
If not worse even, right? Because I mean that Fëanor could very easily have come to resent that as much as the marriage.
Well, and exactly. And you have to remember, right? It's the thing that happens next in this chapter that is really the biggest problem, right? It's not the fact that Fëanor and his father had this kind of intra-family spat, right? It's that somebody else entered into the equation who is a very bad actor and started to manipulate everybody, right?
This always just like, I just shake my head every time I read this, because I'm just like, why? Like, why in the world did they think it would be okay to release Melkor? I mean, I understand justice and whatever, he served his time, but
let's read what Melkor says, right? So Melkor makes some promises, right?
Oh, so, he's so trustworthy, that Melkor. I would have believed.
So remember,
him too.
this is after 3,000 years, right? So 3,000 of our years, 300 Valinor years, 3 ages of the Valar. So this is he's been gone for a long period of time. And look, let's just read what's written here, and then we'll discuss. All right. For it came to pass that Melkor, as the Valar had decreed, completed the term of his bondage, dwelling for 3 ages in the duress of Mandos alone. At length, as Manwë had promised, he was brought again before the thrones of the Valar. Then he looked upon their glory and their bliss, and envy was in his heart. He looked upon the children of Iluvatar that sat at the feet of the mighty, and hatred filled him. He looked upon the wealth of bright gems, and he lusted for them, but he hid his thoughts and postponed his vengeance. Before the gates of Valmar, Melkor abased himself at the feet of Manwë and sued for pardon, vowing that if he might be made only the least of the free people of Valinor, he would aid the Valar in all their works, and most of all in the healing of the many hurts that he had done in the world. And Nienna aided his prayer, but Mandos was silent. All right, so let's deal with those 2 paragraphs in isolation for a second. The first paragraph tells us what Melkor was really thinking. We have the vantage point of the omniscient, like third party perspective, right? Third person perspective. Nope, they don't have that in the story. All they know is Melkor came before, he had been in prison for 3,000 years. He comes before the gates of Valmor and abases himself at the feet of Manwë and sues for pardon, right? Let's just read, what does abase mean? What does abase? I mean, I think we all know it's kind of like, kind of like beat your breast or something like that. He behaves in a way that belittles or degrades someone, right? He humbles himself, he belittles himself, he demeans himself, right? He disgraces himself, right? Before the feet of Manwë and sues for pardon, right? Now, when was the last time you had somebody come before you and demean themselves in front of you, right? Like, it's like, if you've ever experienced anything close to that, of somebody coming to you and just be like, I'm so sorry, please forgive me. You're like, I think for most of us, we're just like, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Please. Like, just.
That's
like,
true. It makes you very uncomfortable.
It can be very disconcerting. And it also like says like, okay, yeah, let's talk about it. Okay. Let's talk about it. Right. I tend to think that when someone does that, personally, me, I tend to think that when someone does that, I'm like, something's wrong. Like, you are manipulating the situation somehow. You want to manipulate the situation somehow. And that doesn't mean I don't think a lot of people like who might do that would know that that's what they want to do. But to me, there's something like when you're going to grovel that much, there's you're up to something, right? Maybe I've just, you've been around the sun a couple of times and you know how people work. Now, that's not to say I don't think that people should like beg for forgiveness when they've done something horribly wrong, right? I do think that's worthwhile, but I think you can sometimes tell in how they do it, right? There's certain details about how they do it. So anyway, but all they know is he comes before them and he debases himself right before them, and we don't even know what that looks like. But they're like, this guy is like next to Manwë and Iluvatar in dignity, right? Like next to Manwë in dignity in terms of what he was created to be, and he is like, he's one of the great beings that Iluvatar created. Like they're thinking of themselves like, like he's one of us, right? In terms of dignity, and he's doing this to himself, right? And whatever that might be. And he's just begging for pardon. And he says, I want to help fix everything I did wrong, which is kind of what you want somebody to say, right? Like you want them to say like, what is it going to take? I will help fix all of the things I did wrong, right? And they're like, awesome, right? Because unless, I think like, when somebody's been locked away for that long, unless you are just a totally, unless you're just a totally vindictive person, and again, like for that long, right? I'm not saying like, for a couple of days and then it's like, I mean, he did a lot of evil, like really horrible evil. But unless you're just totally vindictive person after 3,000 years, you're going to be thinking to yourself, like, maybe we should give him another chance. Like maybe we really should, like, man, that's got to suck being locked away for 3,000 years. So, I'm just saying that is a perspective I can understand, especially when we jump down to the next part where it says, it seemed to Manwë that the evil of Melkor was cured, for Manwë was free from evil and could not comprehend it. And he knew that in the beginning, in the thought of Iluvatar, Melkor had been even as he, and he saw not the depths of Melkor's heart and did not perceive that all love had departed from him forever. Right. So
Manwë's naive.
Basically, right? Like he's still young, right? He's still young in the way in the operations of evil, right? And they're like, they have been fooled twice by him at this point, right? There was the initial battle where he destroys the two lamps, and then he of course flees from that, and then he's up to no good. But that was kind of like, they didn't capture him during that time, so there was Tolkien just whooped him, and then he ran away, and then he set up a Tumno, and he started harassing the elves, and so this is the first time he's really been held to account for everything he did wrong, right? That's one thing to say, right? Is that he's actually been held accountable. He served his time, right? And maybe we should give him another chance, right? Maybe it's time to give him another chance. So I totally get the perspective of like, what a naive idiot like Manwë seems like, but we have a certain perspective that he doesn't.
Well, for sure.
And we cannot imagine what 3,000 years feels like either, right?
I mean, it is completely logical to think that after 3,000 years in prison, surely someone would be reformed. Well, I mean, that seems to make sense.
And remember, Manwë and Melkor were brothers.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? They're brothers in the mind of Iluvatar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, think of this was your brother.
Yeah.
No matter what he'd done wrong.
I know. Right. You want to believe.
Yeah, you do.
That he could change.
And you see him debasing himself, and you're like, whoa, you're my brother. Come on, man. Like it's all good. Right. Just talk. Let's talk about it. Right. Let's talk about it. Melkor also has a way with words. Right. So look, I know, I get it. We all know what's going to happen, right? We all know that this is not a good idea, but I'm not sure.
The story more interesting.
Well, it does make the story more interesting, but let's not be too hasty to cast all this judgment upon Manwë.
All right, Treebeard, fine. I won't be hasty.
I'm okay with you calling. If you want to call me Treebeard, I'm cool with that. So yeah.
No, I understand. No, it's
wish I could go live in the woods somewhere.
Yeah. And not be hasty.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of it's something you can see from both sides, right? And I kind of don't like myself for being cynical. Like I kind of want to be Manwë. Like I want to be willing to show people grace and to have faith that they can change. But also, what they say was like first time shame on me, or first time shame on you, second time shame on me, right? Like for the first time I didn't know any better, right? But second time I now know, right?
Yeah.
And yet I let you do it again.
Well, my point is that this is the first time, right? This is like I know it can seem like multiple times, but it's like if you actually think about it, right? This is the first time that Melkor was actually held to account, right? And this is the first time that he actually served.
That's the first time they actually tried to
for all of the evil he had done,
it.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's like, okay, we gave you this sentence because we wanted you to learn your lesson, right? We wanted you, like, because we ultimately want to restore you, right? Like the heart of any, I think, good person should be, no matter how evil the thing that somebody has done, like to want to restore them, right?
Yeah.
To want to restore them. And with due acknowledgement for that might take a long time, right? For, in certain cases, and it might require the other person having to go through a whole lot, right? But I think especially if we're going to make the argument that Iluvatar is the same as the Judeo-Christian God, right? And that the Valar are, like kind of his rulers that he put into the world in this time period to create and fashion the world, that they are going to have something of that, of his heart as well, right? In the sense of wanting to bring this other creature, this brother of theirs to repentance, to change, right? To lasting change.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well
said.
But they obeyed the judgment of Manwë for those who will defend authority against. Oh, let me jump back for a second. So of course it's Ulmo was not deceived. I love that they mentioned Ulmo specifically, that he was not deceived. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention. What does it say? Melkor had a special helper. He had Nienna, right? Nienna's tears to aid his prayer, right?
Yeah. I know. I read that. I was like, what the heck, Nienna? Like what? Why?
That's her job.
But it's Melkor.
But yes, but he is the supreme, deceiver, right? So, I mean, she's not perfect. Like none of the Valar are perfect. And I think we get a glimpse. That especially in some cases, they are they're pretty naive, right? They're very childlike.
Or they maybe just choose to see the best in others.
Well, but then let's jump down to Ulmo, right? Ulmo was not deceived, right? Ulmo was not deceived. Why wasn't he deceived? Why was he the one that does not seem to have been particularly naive in this case, right? If the rest of them were to some degree.
Do you have an answer for that? Or is it
I can only think it's because he wasn't spending all of his time in Valinor like the rest of them were, right? That he has his ears everywhere in the world. He probably more than anybody else knew all of the evil that Melkor had done in the first place, because the water was like constantly having to wash away all of the stuff that Melkor had done.
Yeah.
And also Melkor was always like abusing Ulmo, right? Like Ulmo's creations, right? Melkor was the one that created snow and that kind of thing, right? And like ice, and and is a like kind of a mockery of Ulmo's creations, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting note. That's my speculation on why that is. And then Tulkas clenched his hands whenever he saw Melkor, his foe, go by. For if Tulkas is slow to wrath, he is slow also to forget, right? So he just looks at him and he's like, I know you're lying. Like Tulkas is just like, he's like that I'm thinking there's somebody I'm thinking of from a movie or something in my head where it's like, everybody else thinks the guy is changed. Oh, you know what it is?
What?
I'm thinking of like Yellowstone. I'm thinking of the daughter on Yellowstone, and how she had the brother Jamie, right? She's always, everybody's always trying to like think that Jamie has changed and everything. And then
Mhm.
she's always like, I know you don't change. I know you don't. I know you can't change. Right.
That's a good.
Now she carries
Yeah.
it to an extreme. I feel like she's like almost like fulfills, like forces a self-fulfilling prophecy on him because she's just really nasty to him all the time.
Yeah.
But it kind of reminds me of that, or just like maybe more so of just like what like kind of that like, you know, sheriff in the Old West who's like, I brought this guy to justice, and all the like really smart like judicial people want to like talk about the case and like, well, maybe we should give him a second chance, and the guy's just like, I brought this guy to justice. I know who he is, right? It's like Tolkien is like, he's just that Old West sheriff who's just like, I know the story of this guy. You can't tell me anything. It's simple, case closed, right? So I love that, you know, little vision of Tolkien right there.
Yeah,
so
I think you're spot on.
All right, but both of them obey the judgment of Manwë. For those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel. And that's a good proverb, but it also sets the stage for what's to come in the next few chapters.
Indeed.
All right. So the last thing that I wanted to bring up is just that Melkor, once he's released, he seems to be doing good things, but he's also doing he's starting to sow some seeds of discontent, of he's starting to hurt relationships between people, like in like some subtle ways. The Vanyar don't want anything to do with Melkor, and Melkor's not interested in the Teleri, right? He kind of looks down on the Teleri and thinks there's not much to them. But he does buddy up to the Noldor, and he really starts to teach them a lot, right? He teaches them a lot about the crafting, you know, of jewels and these sorts of things. He teaches them all this hidden knowledge, and then we learn that everybody except for Fëanor, right? Fëanor is basically like, this guy, I don't trust him, right? Melkor indeed declared afterwards that Fëanor had learned much art from him in secret and had been instructed by him in the greatest of all his works, but he lied in his lust and his envy, for none of the Aldalier ever hated Melkor more than Fëanor, son of Finwë, who first named him Morgoth. Ensnared though he was in the webs of Melkor's malice against the Valar, he held no converse with him and took no counsel from him. For Fëanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only, working ever swiftly and alone, and he asked the aid and sought the counsel of none that dwelt in Aman, great or small, save only and for a little while of Nerdanel the wise, his wife. So Fëanor doesn't believe Melkor for a second.
But he's also very much like Melkor, because it mentions that he's never at rest, and then just this solitary, like the solitude that he creates for himself is very Melkorian.
Yeah, it's the whole takes one to know one kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I know what you're up to.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like you, right? I think just like you. We think alike, right? So lots of interesting stuff in this chapter. Did I skip over anything that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think that was fantastic. Yeah,
great.
Good.
All right, well, let's do some haiku, shall we? All right.
Oh yeah.
3
rock.
Sorry, lift the hand up so people can see. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You gotta make sure people can see it.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Boom. All right, I'm gonna go first.
All right.
Let's see here. All right, my chapter 6 haiku. Envy, hatred, lust, a deceitful alliance. Fëanor, Morgoth.
Nice.
Then I realized it's actually not an alliance, so that's probably the wrong word to use, but it had the right number of syllables.
Too late.
I should have been like 2 peas in a pod.
Anybody want to fix Greta's haiku for her? And take a stab at it in the comments.
Deceitful pair. A deceitful. We'll just stick with alliance.
Those glasses don't make you look too smart now.
Or is it? I should have known it was too good to be true when I wrote it, and like I read the chapter, and like 5 seconds later, I was like, "Ooh, I have my haiku." I was like, "Oh, I guess I misread that last paragraph." But you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Like they're basically like Fëanor is a type of Melkor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it says that he was the first one to name him Morgoth. So clearly Fëanor understood Melkor. Like he knew his deal.
But here's the thing. Here's what I like about about that, using that term alliance, is when Fëanor does what he's going to do in the next few chapters, he inadvertently enters into an alliance of sorts with Melkor, right? In the sense of the rebellion he foments.
That's
right?
Actually what I was thinking about when I wrote my haiku.
Boom. I knew you were.
See?
I knew you were. It's brilliant.
See?
Possibly the greatest haiku of all time.
All right. Your turn.
Right.
See if you can top it.
A dire legacy, a spirit long imprisoned, destinies collide.
Oh, I love the word destiny.
By the way, dire, technically one syllable.
Dire. Did you actually Google it?
I did.
Because I'm not convinced. Dire. I feel like you have to say it with like a southern accent.
Dire, right there. You see any syllable markers? Nope.
What's a syllable marker?
I'll show you what a syllable marker is.
Is it those slashes?
No, it's the little dots.
Oh, it's the dots.
Yeah.
Okay. Dire. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad you got to use your one syllable adjective.
That
was good.
Thank you. All right, let's do a couple listener haikus, shall we? All right, the first one comes from Red Hawk.
Red Hawk never lets us down.
Red Hawk never lets us down.
He always has a haiku. So good.
I love it. All right.
Same.
So, all right. Melkor, Fëanor, with hate and distrust, each same, both spirits of flame.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes. See, Red Hawk and I, we were like on the same wavelength. Let's give him a high five on that one. Whoopsh.
Boom.
Our brains were like totally aligned.
Nicely done.
And what's funny is his first line and my last line were the same, except I used Morgoth instead of Melkor. But nicely done, Red Hawk. Nicely done. So we get each other. Yeah.
The next is from Samuel P.
Samuel. Is that?
Yeah. Samuel P. Yeah.
Okay.
So here we go. Fëanor the Skilled drains power from his mother. Miriel succumbs. Nice.
That's good.
Nice. Good stuff.
Very, very good. Yeah.
Excellent work. Excellent work. All right. So once your haiku read on a future episode, each episode we'll be picking one lucky listener to have their haiku read on air, or maybe two, or maybe just however many we feel like. So go ahead and get them in ASAP. Subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. And then don't forget to correspond with us. Right now, honestly, the best way to do it is on YouTube, but you can also email us. I got to be honest, y'all. YouTube's keeping me pretty busy these days. I get a lot over there. So between YouTube and Patreon are the two places that I'm focusing most. Still send us emails. I like getting the emails because it gives me a little more time to respond to it. But it's getting to the point with a lot of this correspondence where it's harder and harder to keep up with it on a, it was hard enough before. It's getting harder and harder to do it. So, but please just send your comments, send your notes, do our best to read it. Might not always be able to respond to it, but, nevertheless going to read it and appreciate it. And we just, we think we love the correspondence. So
indeed,
please keep it coming. Once again, this month's live stream is scheduled for Wednesday, March 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. We'll be discussing our journey over this last month, as well as all of the big news in Tolkiendom as of late.
Sounds good. Be there, be square. It's going to be blessed.
That's right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R.,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Jacob Lockham,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T.,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S.,
Brian O.,
Emilio P.,
Zeke F.,
James A.,
James L.,
Chris L.,
Chuck F.,
Azia V.,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C.,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D.,
Eric S.,
Eric B.,
Johanna T.,
Mike M.,
Robert H.,
Paul D.,
Julia,
Werty,
Matthew W.,
Joe Bagelman,
Chris K.,
and Jacob S.
Thanks, guys.
As well as those celebrating their patron anniversary this month in March of 2022, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Paul D.,
Daria,
Stephen S.,
Jay-Z,
Andrew T.,
Bethany E.,
and Daniel Delaney.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much for your support. And thanks to everybody for listening. We will talk at you next time.
And for watching.
And for watching.
We'll see y'all later.
Listening while you watch.
Bye, guys.
Bye.